right, I am going to start us off with a quiz today.
Oh boy.
Yeah, it's a good one. 8 o'clockers love this. First question, which Academy Award-winning actor opened their acceptance speech with these words? My journey started on a boat. I spent a year in a refugee camp, and somehow I ended up here on Hollywood's biggest stage. 2023 Academy Award-winning actor. Any thoughts? Guess of which movie it was? Nobody? You know what?
It was the movie with the funny long name.
Everything.
Everywhere, anywhere,
everything,
whatever, and therefore.
Everything, everywhere, all at once.
Vietnamese, I believe.
Yes, it's the other multiverse movie.
Short round.
The actor's name is, and I hope I get this right, Ke Huy Quan. How's that? And he won the Best Supporting Actor Oscar. And as a child, he and his family fled Vietnam along with almost 2 million other Vietnamese in the wake of the Vietnam War. Second question. Which beloved fictional detective was also a refugee? He's British. Well, no. His author is British.
Poirot.
You got it! All right, so where's Poirot from?
Belgium.
Belgium, right. We have to make sure, he's pretty particular about that. So apparently Agatha Christie was inspired because her town in Devonshire had taken in a number of refugees from Belgium from the First World War, and that's how she was inspired for the character of Hercule Poirot. Last one. This British singer-songwriter who was also a refugee became famous for leading a rock band who had a hit song called We Are the Champions.
Freddie Mercury.
Freddie Mercury from Queen. Everyone know who that?
Armenia.
Close. Interestingly, I thought so too, but in fact, apparently he's Parsi Indian, born in Zanzibar. Does everyone know where that is? It's off the coast of Tanzania and Kenya. And he and his family fled the Zanzibari revolution to find safety in the UK in the 60s. So what's the theme here? Refugees, right. Because as I delved into the story of Hagar and Ishmael, I was like, oh, they are refugees, right? They're refugees. And I don't know if anyone else picked up on this, but this past Monday was World Refugee Day. So I'm like, you know, when things like that overlap, you're like, okay, I got to pay attention. Yes, God, right? So let's delve into Hagar and Ishmael's story a little bit more today. Now, Hagar's origins are a little bit obscured in the biblical text. We do know that she was a slave, originally under the possession of the Egyptian pharaoh. But that means that she could have literally come from anywhere in the Near East or beyond, because she most likely was taken as a spoil of war or prisoner of war. We also know that she was handed off to Abraham in a kind of shady transaction that was meant to smooth over a mishandling or misunderstanding around his wife Sarah ending up in the Pharaoh's harem. Now, that is too complicated for me to cover today, so we're going to put that one on the shelf. But check it out in the Bible, because it's definitely one of the more wacky stories that's in there.
Yeah, the Bible could make Springer blush.
Exactly. We also know that Hagar has already tried to escape from her family and the abuse that she suffers there in their household at least once. but she's sent back. The Bible says she was sent back by God, but I have to say that I definitely struggle with that passage and look at it over and over and think, was this God or was this people trying to put it on God? We'll never know. That's for your theological reflection, but yeah, another part of her story. We also know that she was forced to be a surrogate mother, which is what resulted in Ishmael's birth. Ishmael was brought into the world to be a substitute heir for Sarah and Abraham, but now there's a child born of Sarah. So all of a sudden, Hagar and Ishmael's very existence have become a threat. So here we are today. Hagar and her son have been cast out. They have been made refugees. Now, their story is a story of encounter with God. But it's one of the ones that's both as arresting as it is powerful to read, I think. Because it's not always obvious to us where exactly the good news lies. But we also know that their story contains truth. Because we know from looking at the world around us that people who are forced to flee their native lands often face death as they cross oceans and borderlands. We know that even if they survive that journey, they are still vulnerable to abuse and imprisonment and neglect in wherever it is that they land. And we know that without a place of refuge, they live in uncertainty about their food and where their next meal, where their shelter will come from, as well as their safety and what their futures will look like. So, if you weren't here last week, I told everybody we have a piece of a series of art that's going to walk with us through our journey with all of the stories of the patriarch that goes on for about 12 weeks. I think we'll finish it up in September. And the picture was in your email for this week. It was also on the front of your bulletin, but it misses the colors. So I've made a couple of copies to sort of pass around because I want to make sure everybody can see that wonderful color that's there. Go ahead and pass this around. Ooh. I know, ooh, right?
You guys, I like Ishmael's eyes.
She looks like you.
Thank you.
Make sure everybody gets to see it.
If only. What color?
Online congregation, you should have it in color because you guys have PDFs of your bulletin. So have a look at that because that's what I did when I sat down to prepare for this sermon. And the first thing that I noticed when I looked at it was all of that color, right? It's a lot of color. I mean, these two people have been cast out in the desert, not always known as a place full of like that rich, saturated kind of color. And yet this picture is almost illuminated from behind. It's full of jewel tones, like looking through a stained glass window, right? To me, the implicit message in this picture is that their story is not an embarrassing sideline. It's not something that we can just sort of try to forget. Instead, Hagar and Ishmael's story is a story of faith. And we're meant to pay attention. Just like we're meant to pay attention to all the other stories of saints and heroes of the Bible that we see in all the other stained glass windows in our churches and cathedrals. Now, you're right, Tina. The next thing that grabbed me is their eyes, right? Because their eyes are looking straight at us. There was no way that I could look away because their expression drew me in. Their expression compelled, almost pulled out, wrested out from my heart empathy for their plight. It's like they seem to be saying to me, see me. I am not invisible. I matter too. And they're the only two figures in the frame. I mean, the text that we read today could tempt us to spend our time delving into the complicated marital dynamics that led to the ejection of Hagar and Ishmael. But I feel like this picture counters that for today. The picture's trying to tell us Hagar and Ishmael's story is all that matters right now. The artist, Lauren Wright Pittman, describes it this way. I painted her eyes, saturated and full, holding the grace that God so freely offered her, the grace that humanity had withheld from her. But you know what else about her eyes? They also kind of reminded me of that famous National Geographic photo taken of Shabat Gula, an Afghan refugee in Pakistan during the Soviet-Afghan War. Does anyone seen that one? Yeah, like we've all seen it a million times. Well, many years later, Shabat told a reporter that she was angry when the photo was taken, because it was against her culture to make eye contact with a non-family member. So that challenges me to wonder, is Hagar and Ishmael's eye contact of their own agency? Is it meant to make us look, or is it yet another thing that's been stolen from them? I think ultimately we can't know. But that discomfort at all of the intimacy in that gaze and the way that it unsettles us, viewers, it's important either way, I think. We need to hold on to all of those possibilities. And I think maybe it goes both ways, because if you look up the edge of Hagar's garments, they have eyes too, right? Yeah, there's eyes right up the side, and there's even one right there on her sleeve. I didn't notice those at first, but I saw them, and then, you know what? I couldn't unsee them.
Wow.
Yeah. Because it's like those eyes are staring at me and saying, I see you, even if you try to ignore what's going on here. I know. I know that you see, and I know that you did nothing but watch. But you know what else I think those eyes offer? I think they offer, as they ripple in that soft fabric, some grace to us, the viewer. To me, they kind of remind me that even Hagar could not watch when she thought that death was upon her son. I think all of this is telling us that we are meant to lean into all of this discomfort that this story brings to our hearts. The other thing that comes, I think, next is right up there in that right-hand top corner. All those sharp rays. They look kind of like what children do when they're drawing the sunshine, right? And they have the sun rays. That is, I think, meant to represent the heavenly visitor that we get here. It's not clear if it's God or the angel of God. The language goes back and forth, which is pretty common in this chunk of Hebrew scripture. But I think those rays mean that God's hand is at work here, rescuing Hagar and Ishmael from certain death. And it goes beyond just that little act, right? It's not just this quick Hail Mary pass, like, boom, there's your well, I'm out of here. Mm-mm. God remains with them, we are told, all through Ishmael's growing up. God becomes involved, and God transforms their whole story. I think that's symbolized in the way that Ishmael has the same rays on his shirt. See, around his neck and kind of spreading out across, so it's kind of filling all of him. It's like a map of the divine intervention that's working its way through his entire life. I mean, his conception may have been orchestrated so that he could be a substitute heir, only to be cast aside. But God is not casting Ishmael aside. God instead makes him the progenitor of a whole other holy people, because Islam traces their lineage back to him and Hagar. And Hagar's life is recast by this intervention from God too. I don't know how many of you have hold of those pictures, and maybe we need to pass them around again, but have a look at the water. That's the water that God made appear. That was how his salvation was made concrete. And it's alive and shimmering with color, and it's seeping its way up her hair. You know, her hair's black, but the water is turning it that bright, bright blue. You see, she is no longer a slave or a refugee cast out to die. She's becoming the foremother of a nation. She has a future now that includes a place where she and Ishmael will thrive, even if it's out in the wilderness. God is with her and her son through all of it. And I think that kind of takes me back to the adornments in her garment. Because the artist suggests that the eyes, they're not just symbolic of Hagar's clear vision that sees how people see her. The artist suggests that she also wanted those eyes to represent the countless stars that evoke this promise of a great nation that will become their progeny. So, back to my original question. Where is the good news in this story of faith and encounter with God? I think after spending time with the picture and the reading, I think the good news is in Ishmael's name. Because Ishmael's name means God hears. God hears. See, Hagar and Ishmael, theirs is a story of desperation that is beyond anything that I can imagine in my own life experience. And yet, there is still hope held out to them that they managed to claim. Now, I imagine that I would be like Hagar. I would struggle to grasp at this hope that God might listen to me after I'd been through so much ill use and disappointed hope in my life. Hagar doesn't figure out how to cry out to God anymore. But you know what? Ishmael does. That's who God hears, is Ishmael. Ishmael is tapping into the blessing that he's actually heard repeated to him every time someone addresses him through his entire life. God hears. God hears. God hears. God hears us. All of us. And not just us. I think that's the important piece to remember. Because God hears even the people whose voices are not well heard within and by the rest of the human family. In fact, God hears the voices of those that, well, let's face it, we sometimes would just rather not hear. I think there's a couple of different encounters with God to be had here in this story this week. There is definitely right there in front of us an encounter with God who hears and rescues the truly desperate and abandoned. This is an amazing and miraculous picture of the God who saves us in the most basic meaning of that word. Here, have water and live. But there's another, I think, encounter in there. An encounter that I think that's meant for us too. It's a call to us to encounter Hagar and Ishmael and the way that God meets them from a place where we are sitting in safe sanctuary, in a native land, with free agency and the chance, the security that all that affords us, that privilege, that place. It calls us to listen and include and to hear what the Hagars and Ishmaels of the world are telling us they need. See, we're the readers. We get to meet God in this story of miraculous divine invention as a call to change our hearts. As a call to not just stare, but to listen and to keep on listening to their stories and their needs. To us, I think that encounter with God is saying, don't you turn away. Listen like I listen. So like I said at the beginning, this past week on the 20th was World Refugee Day. In his speech marking the day, President Biden reminded us that today nearly 110 million people have been forced to leave their homes around the world, which is more refugees than at any time before in human history. The 2023 theme for World Refugee Day was Hope Away from Home, a world where refugees are included, where they're heard, noticed, welcomed into sanctuary. See, after spending time with Hagar and Ishmael, I think what they needed more than anything else at any point in this story was simply to be seen and treated as human beings, not as property or tools of someone else's larger agenda or embarrassing inconveniences to, be erased when their utility was over. If Hagar and Ishmael had been given a place to belong and a means to make a living and thrive, they would not have needed to be rescued by God, right? This story of faith and encounter with God, it is supposed to make us feel uncomfortable. It is to move us to a place where our compassion is a bit less like the callous compassion across the run-of-the-mill human variety, and a bit more like the boundless compassion of God. And there's plenty of places for us to step into this calling, I think. Because, this week was World Refugee Day. This morning is the Pride Parade in San Francisco, which is playing out this year on a backdrop of rising anti-LGBTQ legislation at home and abroad. Today, we could very well leave here and meet an unhoused member of our human brother and sisterhood on a street corner on our way home. All over the place, this is a call that God offers to us. When we meet someone who's not heard, hear their voice saying, "See me. I'm not invisible, and I matter too." Because God hears every last one of us. That was what was buried in, I admit, a complicated gospel from Matthew, a lot in there. But right in the middle of it, it says, even the hairs of our heads are all counted, every last one of them, on every last one of us. So today I invite you, be comforted in that hope as you let yourselves be moved to hear what is uncomfortable and to respond with the compassion that God gives to us. Amen.